A royal guard's kick to a man's groin at Buckingham Palace shocked onlookers. This wasn't a random act, but a response to a breach of protocol that left witnesses stunned. What drove a tourist to challenge the symbol of regal authority? The confrontation tested not only the guard's legendary restraint, but also society's expectations of respect for centuries-old customs. Discover how a drunken tourist's attempt to mock tradition led to a clash that pushed a guard's composure to its limits. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more amazing stories and drop a like. As the sun dipped below London's skyline, casting long shadows across Buckingham Palace's grounds, James Matthews stood at attention. His scarlet uniform contrasted sharply with the darkening sky, a beacon of tradition in the cooling evening air. The last tourists filtered out through the gates, leaving behind a peaceful calm. James's eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the thinning crowd. 3 years as a royal guard had honed his instincts to detect even the slightest hint of trouble. He catalogued every detail: the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional click of a tourist's camera. The clock tower chimed 9, its resonant tones cutting through the tranquility. Suddenly, chaos erupted. The sound of shattering glass pierced the air, followed by raucous laughter. James's muscles coiled beneath his uniform, ready to spring into action. Dave Thompson stumbled into view, reeking of beer and sweat, his bloodshot eyes fixed on James, and a cruel smirk played across his face. "Oi, look at this one!" he shouted. "All dressed up like a bloody Christmas nutcracker!" James remained motionless, his training kicking into overdrive. He noted Dave's unsteady gait, the beer stains on his shirt, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. Every detail screamed potential threat. Dave circled James, hurling insults. "What's the matter, mate? Cat got your tongue? Or are you just too posh to talk to us common folk?" A crowd gathered, some filming with their phones, others watching with concern. James's mind raced through protocols: maintain composure, don't engage unless physically threatened, wait for backup if necessary. But as Dave's taunts grew more personal, James felt sweat trickle down his back. "Look at you, standing there like a statue," Dave sneered. "Bet you think you're better than us. Well, I've got news for you, mate. You're nothing but a fancy doorman in a silly hat." The insult landed like a physical blow. James had faced hecklers before, but Dave's demeanor set off alarm bells. This wasn't just a drunk seeking attention. There was a dangerous edge to his behavior. As Dave's tirade continued, James analyzed possible outcomes. He knew any reaction could escalate the situation, but Dave was becoming increasingly unpredictable. The crowd grew larger, with some calling for Dave to back off. "Leave him alone, mate!" a young woman shouted. "He's just doing his job!" Her words only fueled Dave's anger. He spun around, nearly losing his balance. "Oh, you want me to leave him alone, do you?" "Maybe I don't feel like it. Maybe I want to see if this toy soldier can actually do something." James's training had prepared him for many scenarios, but a drunk and aggressive individual was always a wild card. As Dave turned back with malice in his eyes, James knew this night would test the very limits of his training and resolve. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as Dave's drunken tirade intensified. His slurred words morphed into vicious insults, tension crackling around Buckingham Palace's gates. Onlookers shifted uncomfortably, caught between fascination and alarm. James Matthews stood motionless, his scarlet uniform a fortress of discipline amid the chaos. Years of training had forged his iron resolve, but Dave's escalating behavior was battering at the walls of his composure. "Oi, you fancy-dressed mannequin!" Dave bellowed, swaying dangerously close. "What's the matter? Too stupid to speak?" His bloodshot eyes searched for any reaction. The crowd held its breath. A mother hurried her children away while tourists whispered urgently, cameras forgotten. Dave, emboldened by James's silence, stumbled forward and flicked a polished button on the guard's uniform. James's muscles coiled beneath his scarlet armor. His training demanded unwavering discipline. But a storm brewed beneath the surface. He could feel the fortress of his control beginning to crack. An older man watched with growing concern, his veteran's eye catching the subtle signs most would miss. The tightening of James's jaw, the slight shift in stance. He recognized the pressure building within the young guard. Dave raised his beer in a mocking toast. "Here's to Her Majesty's finest!" The liquid splashed across James's uniform, staining the fabric. The veteran winced, empathy surging as he recalled his own military service. James remained still, but his grip on his rifle tightened, a warning sign only another soldier would recognize. His knuckles whitened beneath his white gloves, the only outward indication of his inner struggle. Dave, mistaking James's stillness for weakness, pressed his advantage. He leaned in close, his beer-soaked breath hot against James's face. "What's it gonna take to make you crack, eh? Maybe I should pay a visit to that fancy palace, show them how a real man handles things." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Even in his drunken state, Dave had to realize he'd crossed a line. Threatening the palace itself was no mere prank. It was a potential security risk. James's mind raced, evaluating the situation with swift efficiency. Dave's words hadn't crossed into physical threat, but his proximity and aggression were pushing dangerous boundaries. The rules of engagement were clear: maintain position unless faced with a direct threat. But as Dave's behavior escalated, the definition of threat began to blur in James's mind. The veteran in the crowd saw the change in James's eyes. It was subtle, a hardening of resolve, a decision made in the split second between one heartbeat and the next. He braced himself, knowing that action was imminent. In that moment, as the crowd held its breath, and Dave opened his mouth for another tirade, James made his choice. His training had prepared him for this: to protect the crown, to maintain order, and when necessary, to act. The evening air hung heavy with tension as James Matthews, the stalwart royal guard, faced an escalating threat. Dave's drunken mind had latched onto a new prize: the towering bearskin cap atop James's head. The iconic headpiece, a symbol of centuries of British military tradition, now stood as the last barrier between order and chaos. Dave stumbled forward, arms outstretched, fingers grasping at the air just inches from the pristine fur. The crowd held its collective breath, sensing the line about to be crossed. James's military training kicked in, his mind assessing the threat with lethal precision. Every muscle in his body tensed, ready to spring into action, yet the strict code of conduct held him in check. For a brief moment, James's thoughts flashed to his first day wearing the bearskin cap, the weight of history and duty settling on his shoulders. The memory steeled his resolve as Dave's mockery took on a physical dimension. Dave straightened his posture, puffing out his chest in a crude parody of ceremonial precision. His exaggerated movements grated against the historic stones of Buckingham Palace, each gesture a fresh insult to the traditions James had sworn to uphold. As evening deepened, long shadows stretched across the courtyard, mirroring the growing danger. The onlookers stood frozen, horror and fascination warring on their faces. Dave, pushing boundaries further, fumbled with his belt buckle. The vulgar threat sent shocked gasps through the crowd. James's mind raced, weighing his options. The strict rules of engagement echoed in his thoughts, yet as Dave's intentions became clearer, James recognized the potential security risk to the palace itself. The tense silence shattered with the unmistakable sound of liquid splashing against leather. Dave had begun to relieve himself on James's impeccably polished boots. The act was more than a personal affront. It was a direct assault on the dignity of the Royal Guard and everything they represented. This final transgression proved to be the tipping point. In that moment, James made a split-second decision. Years of training had prepared him for this: to protect the crown, to maintain order, and when necessary, to act. With swift precision, James raised his foot and delivered a powerful kick to Dave's most sensitive area. Dave crumpled to the ground, his face a mask of shock and pain. The crowd erupted in a mix of gasps, cheers, and nervous laughter. James resumed his stoic stance, his expression betraying no emotion. As Dave lay writhing, security personnel quickly moved in to take control. The crowd began to disperse, their excited chatter filling the air with recounts of what they had just witnessed. The crowd's chatter faded as a hush fell over the scene. Matthew's stance shifted imperceptibly, his weight redistributing in a way only a trained soldier would notice. The veteran in the crowd recognized the signs, stepping back and pulling his wife with him. Time seemed to slow as Dave remained oblivious to the change in Matthew's posture, still focused entirely on his deplorable act. Matthew's military training kicked into high gear. His mind raced through calculations of trajectory, force, and consequence with lightning speed. Like a tightrope walker balancing over a chasm of chaos, the guard weighed his options, his eyes narrowing slightly, the only visible sign of the internal struggle behind his stoic facade. Dave's stream of insults continued unabated, each word further cementing his fate. He seemed completely unaware of the impending response to his ultimate act of disrespect. The air crackled with tension as onlookers held their breath, sensing that something momentous was about to occur. With surgical precision, Matthew's legs snapped up in a perfect arc. The movement was so swift and controlled that many in the crowd barely registered it until the impact. His foot connected with Dave's most sensitive area, showcasing the non-lethal takedown techniques often employed by military personnel. The impact was immediate and profound. Dave's eyes widened in shock as he was lifted several inches off the ground by the force of the kick. His stream of insults was cut brutally short, replaced by a high-pitched wheeze that seemed to echo across the palace grounds. Then, as if in slow motion, Dave crumpled. He landed with a wet splash in the puddle of his own making, a fitting end to his misguided attempt at rebellion. The crowd gasped collectively, a mix of shock and satisfaction rippling through the onlookers. Matthews returned to his position, his posture as rigid and professional as ever. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed as if nothing had happened at all, but those who had witnessed the event knew they had just seen a masterclass in controlled response to a threat. The legal justifications for Matthew's use of force stemmed from his extensive training, which had prepared him to respond to threats while maintaining the dignity of his position. As a ceremonial guard, he was entrusted not only with the safety of the palace, but also with upholding the honor and tradition of the royal guard. In the aftermath, security personnel quickly moved in to take control. Dave lay on the ground, alternating between groans and gasps for air. The crowd began to disperse, their excited chatter filling the air with recounts of what they had just witnessed. As the commotion settled, Matthews remained at his post, his eyes forward and his posture impeccable. To those who looked closely, there was a subtle air of satisfaction about him, a sense that justice had been served and order restored. The aftermath of Matthew's swift actions settled over the palace grounds like a heavy fog. The air, once filled with Dave's drunken taunts, now resonated with his pained whimpers. Onlookers stood frozen, their eyes darting between the crumpled form on the ground and the stoic guard who had resumed his post as if nothing had transpired. Matthews stood tall, his scarlet uniform pristine, save for the amber stains of Dave's spilled beer. His eyes gazed forward, unflinching, a living monument to duty amidst the chaos that had erupted moments before. The crowd, a mix of awe and unease, processed the raw display of controlled power they had just witnessed. The veteran in the crowd nodded approvingly, understanding the delicate balance Matthews had struck, upholding his duty while defending his honor. As the shock began to wear off, a ripple of whispered approval and ethical debate spread through the gathering. The young woman who had earlier defended Dave now stood silent, her bravado replaced by conflicted sympathy. Palace security approached with unhurried steps, their casual demeanor suggesting familiarity with such incidents. They moved with practiced ease, giving Matthews the unspoken courtesy of handling the situation his way. Dave struggled to rise, each movement a painful reminder of his ill-conceived antics. The lead officer, a stocky man with a well-trimmed mustache, addressed Dave. "Right then, sir. Let's review your offenses. public urination, disorderly conduct, and assault on a member of the Queen's Guard. Dave blinked up at him, the gravity of his situation slowly sinking in, sobering him faster than a pot of strong coffee. "You should know, sir, that we take these matters very seriously," the officer continued, his tone hardening. "The Royal Guards are highly trained professionals responsible for the palace's safety and upholding the honor of their position." As two officers helped Dave to his feet, the lead officer glanced at Matthews, who remained motionless. "You're lucky. That guard showed remarkable restraint. It could have been much worse." The crowd parted as Dave was led away, their faces a mix of pity and schadenfreude. The incident, while brief, had showcased the complex dynamics at play. Matthews had demonstrated not just physical prowess, but a keen understanding of the balance between ceremonial duties and public safety. His response, swift yet measured, was designed to incapacitate without causing permanent harm. For the onlookers, it was a stark reminder of the very real authority wielded by these seemingly decorative figures. The Royal Guards, with their iconic bearskin caps and scarlet uniforms, were more than tourist attractions. They were highly trained individuals, capable of effective action when duty called, upholding tradition while prepared to quell any chaos that threatened the order they represented. The legend of the Buckingham Palace incident spread among Royal Guards, a powerful reminder of their duty's gravity. Matthew's action embodied centuries of tradition and sacrifice, transforming a simple confrontation into a testament of the Guard's true nature. Behind their stoic faces stood highly trained warriors, ready to defend not just palace grounds, but the essence of their role. This story highlights the delicate balance these guards maintain, upholding tradition while adapting to modern security needs. Their response to disrespect reflected the weight of their responsibility, a lesson etched into the collective memory of both guards and public. The Royal Guard's unwavering dedication serves as a mirror, challenging us to consider our own commitment to duty and honor in a changing world.